Hello, everybody, and welcome to this virtual spotlight event as part of Empire Space's Space Week New York 2025 program. We are highlighting different companies who are doing really interesting things across the state of New York as part of our week highlighting New York's space ecosystem and its potential for the future. Today, we are joined by Kaylon Paterson from Paterson Aerospace. They are an innovative company doing a lot of interesting work here in New York, focused on the area of space sustainability. And I'll obviously let Kaylon dig more into that. We've had the pleasure of touching base with him a couple of times over the years. We're both affiliate members of the New York Consortium for Space Technology. We're really excited about the work that he's doing. So thank you very much, Kaylon, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Patrick.
So the way this will work is we'll do kind of a back and forth for 30, 40 minutes. If members of the audience have questions, feel free to drop them in during the conversation. If it makes sense, we'll take them then. If not, we'll do an open Q&A towards the end. We've also put some helpful links in the chat for Space Week New York, different parts of Paterson Aerospace that we'll probably be touching on during the conversation today. So yeah, Kaylon, just tell us about Paterson Aerospace, kind of your journey to how you got here today and a broad overview of the work that you're doing.
Sure. So Paterson Aerospace is a space sustainability company now based in upstate New York. We focus on technologies that enhance the way that we approach the space industry going forward into the future, with the idea that the current technologies that we have are not necessarily built with sustainability in mind, but that doesn't mean that we have to get rid of them. Maybe we could find more effective ways to approach the use of them so that we can have a space industry and space exploration for future generations. My journey here began a long time ago, really from my interest in becoming an aerospace engineer, or at least the gaining the courage to take that leap anyway. The interest was always there. Of course, everyone grows up watching, documentaries about, the cosmos and space and, space exploration, but you don't really know that you have that in you until you really take that leap. So I had some really good teachers in high school that got me a little more confident in my math and my physics ability, got me to think about, could I really engage in these problems and try to solve them? And fast forward a few years through, I did math in undergrad, did a lot of research, undergraduate research, and got some awards for that, and really set my mind around this idea of being a researcher during that time. Went on to take a fellowship out in Germany for a year, where I really started or got engrossed into the aerospace industry through both graduate courses as well as through an internship. And when I returned, I went to Stevens Institute, where one of our audience members here is currently a student, which is, it's not necessarily in New York, but it shares a border with New York City, the Hudson. So we like to claim, a little bit of both. We can be on both sides. But yeah, after Stevens, I got a job off. Well, while at Stevens, I guided my own thesis project, which was around the essence of this this company. And from there, I received an award from the school and a job offer from the DoD, all because of that project. And so I went on to work for the DoD for a few more years. While I was doing that, I was continuing to work on this the project in the background to really establish what the idea or the technology would look like. And then fast forward a few more years, went off to business school, got a degree, one of the first ever programs in business for the space industry. And that really gave me the confidence to do this full time. So it's a little bit about the journey to this point.
Thank you so much for that. I'd heard pieces of that before, but I don't know if I really heard the full story. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And it just made me think of something else that we've heard from a lot of different folks during Space Week so far this year, is everyone has different journeys into the space sector, and a lot of them aren't necessarily traditional. And so a lot of it is that that self-confidence and that vision, like, yes, I have a future in this industry, and what do I want that to look like, and then going out there and making it happen. So thank you so much for sharing that. Tell us a little bit more about where in New York you are, and why that was conducive to setting up shop.
Yeah. So we're in central New York, Rome to be specific. And we got here kind of by chance. So in that time of leaving the DoD and figuring out what this company needed to look like to be an actual company, I a lot of folks in my LinkedIn network are within the defense sector, and I saw someone repost about the Hustle Defense Accelerator, which is held by the Griffiths Institute. And so I took a chance, applied, got in, moved out here to Rome for about 2 months while we did the accelerator program. And then we ended up being a winner. So from there, uh, I still was back and forth to where I used to live in Maryland. And what solidified the actual physical move was winning additional funding through the AFRL Mid-Atlantic Hub. And once we did that, it was pretty much set in stone that we were going to come out here, set up shop, and we were able to get an office at the Griffiths incubation space, which we now currently work out of.
That's fantastic. We're aware of a number of companies who've done work at Griffiths. It really is a key hub in New York's entire space ecosystem, particularly upstate for that region. It really does a lot of fantastic work there. So in terms of Paterson in your core mission, space sustainability, and you say it on your website, protecting the space environment from the aerospace sector. I guess just tell us a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah. So like every other environmental concern, you find that it's kind of after the fact that we consider environmental, protection. So we had all these industries and industrialization take place. Then we realized we were polluting rivers and polluting the air and making noise and all these things. And space was very similar, except that space had all those lessons learned and they still ignored it. So this, going back to my undergraduate research, I was always very engrossed in this environmental protection idea because I grew up in a small island nation where environmental considerations, hurricanes, all these things are a daily concern. So going to this industry and finding out that there was no real concern about the impact that we're having on the earth, let alone future environments, it kind of sparked my interest. And it took a while to really wrap my mind around this idea. It actually was in Germany working on some school projects that I started to realize that, hey, there's a gray area here that we're not talking about or thinking about. And there were some companies at the time doing research into green propellants for launch and those kinds of things, but there was no holistic space sustainability idea yet. And when I jumped into my thesis, the year, literally a month or two after I graduated, space sustainability just took off as a topic of interest, and all these papers started coming out and all these experts started showing up. And it kind of gave me the motivation to keep doing this, because now we do have this new area of space, right? Which, was well timed in the sense of this new space industry, new space economy, because it opened up the door to not just thinking about space as this government defense exploration thing, but more so of a human approach to it, an everyday approach to it. So, you have now companies that are thinking about sending more people to space and space tourism and all these things. So why not have more sustainable practices in it? Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I know the common way that most people would think about this would be space debris, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the impact. So I guess just talk for the audience just a second about, space debris. It's something that people may have seen of, in the news or aware of as a concept, but just kind of drill down into the risks of, the space debris problem, because I don't know if everyone has a proper appreciation for just how dicey it is currently and how it can be in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I find less and less that I'm meeting people on the street that don't know what space debris is, so that makes me really happy, but also sad because it shouldn't be that big of an issue. But yeah, so space debris, the real concept around the proliferation of space debris was really developed in the 70s, and it was really just a projection of what we thought was going to happen based on all the things we were putting up there and the progression of human space exploration. It never really crossed that threshold from theory into an actual thing because we weren't launching a bunch of stuff. We weren't doing it that frequently that it was a concern, right? And we had practices that we thought were good enough, like end of life practices, sending stuff to burn up in orbit or sending them out into wherever. But then in the early 2000s-ish, you have the Iridium Cosmos thing, you have a bunch of ASAT tests, you have all this stuff going on that suddenly we go from, a handful of launches a year to having these incidents where it didn't matter that we were launching things. What mattered now is that we have a bunch of stuff out there that we don't know how to track. And now going into space commercialization, where we have more access to space, more frequent launches, more companies doing frequent launches, reusable rockets, all these things. And that now increases the population of active things in orbit. So now we have this kind of hitting from both sides. You have this ton of debris out there, and you have a ton of new things being entered into the atmosphere. And so just seemingly overnight, I will say, it became a real issue. And then within, I would say, the last year or two, we start seeing things kind of falling to the ground and falling into people's backyards and falling into our backyard in Canada. And so, now suddenly it's an everyday person concern. What's going to fall out of the sky? Is it going to hit my house? Is it going to hit me? And so this is kind of where all of these things start to align, and where space debris really becomes a problem for everybody.
Yeah, I think the risks are very real, and it's good that there is a company like Paterson that is employing a couple of different approaches for how to tackle this. We've established that the problem exists, and so I just want you to kind of talk the audience through a couple different things. So tell us about the situational awareness satellite system, and just kind of how that fits into solving these problems.
Sure. So this is one of our two flagship ideas that came out of my thesis in grad school. And the idea being that we were tracking everything from the ground, and we know that that's not efficient. We know that there are a lot of problems there. So why not build a system to do that in space? And those things have existed for a long time, but they weren't being used for this particular problem, nor were they being explored as a potential solution. And the bigger picture here of why we focused on improving data collection rather than improving removal was twofold. One side is that removal is very complicated from a political standpoint, as well as from a physics standpoint. It's very difficult to do that in a safe and sustainable way, which is why, even though we have major companies that are trying to explore this, we still haven't actually provided a viable solution yet. The other side of this was that we know that there are hundreds of millions of objects that aren't tracked because of their size or because of all kinds of other factors. And so putting something in orbit might be a better way to track those things that we can't see from ground-based radar. So that was kind of the twofold reasoning behind how that idea was developed.
And so what is the system exactly? Like, tell us, I guess, how this would be, employed.
Yeah, so it's a series of sensors and processors. It's all on edge or in orbit, and it basically collects data on what's out there and does all the processing on in situ. So we can essentially identify an object, figure out its trajectory, and figure out if it's a threat or not for whatever satellite our system is on. And we are currently implementing on top of that the capacity to do trajectory analysis, so that you can provide more decision making around maneuvers for that spacecraft. So in essence, we're automating the decision making process to allow the satellite to do its own autonomous collision avoidance.
Okay, that's really cool. Is there a specific market or type of set? I would assume that all customers would probably be interested in this, but is there a particular customer base that makes more sense now than others?
Yeah, it would be the folks that are sending up large constellations, and it would be for satellites that, unfortunately, there's no retrofitting for satellites just yet. So we would have to apply this to stuff that still hasn't been launched. so pre-launch that spacecraft.
Very interesting.
But it can work for anybody. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's good. So, so that sounds really resourceful, because I would imagine tracking things from the ground, there's a latency period. So this saves an incredible amount of time in terms of how quickly you're able to intervene in a potential incident.
Absolutely. Yep.
Excellent. And so I know another thing that you guys work on is the satellite accountability blockchain. I was hoping that you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, so this is our actual flagship. So this was the first idea that came out of that thesis project, and the idea behind it being that same question you asked about the analysis and the speeding up the data processing so that we can get operators the information they need faster. That's where this came from. Twofold on the speed and the accuracy, but also on the security of data side of things, because obviously we know in the defense sector that we find a lot of things being able to be spoofed or being able to be data can be adjusted, especially when it goes through a bunch of analysis cycles and processes before it gets to the end user. So yeah, essentially this is an improved catalog that uses like machine learning, uses heritage data and previous incidents to learn how we can optimize the radar data that we get in for the system. And then it also has the capacity to bring in data from other systems, very similar to a lot of what the new ideas that a lot of these companies are getting, that we're realizing we can't just rely on radar. We have to look at other data collection sources like telescopes, etc. So being able to merge all that data and do some data fusion essentially to increase the accuracy, speed up the analysis, and get it to the user much faster so that we can avoid collisions and avoid potential catastrophes.
Well, that sounds incredibly useful. Again, I would assume the market there is pretty much everyone who operates a satellite.
Yeah. Yeah,
No.
but this kind of broadens our market a little bit because it allows us to also serve companies that already have stuff in orbit, whereas the other technology is only for near pre-launch capabilities.
That makes sense. And then I know. So those are your flagships, and I'm assuming that there were probably some questions from the audience about those. But I also know, and this was just kind of curiosity from my website. Can you tell us about Maverick?
Yeah, sure. So Maverick was kind of a need-based situation. So we saw that there was a lot of interest going on in the space food arena, and it was an interesting aerospace topic at the time, and we had the right experts in our network. So we reached out to some folks and asked questions and started to put a team together. And essentially what Maverick is a space food platform that optimizes the way that we grow and harvest food for astronauts in terms of making a much larger yield, but also minimizing the amount of human capital that's required to run the system. So automation, and on top of that, reducing waste. So one of the biggest challenges with any natural system in space is that you're living in this confined space and there is waste, and you can't leave that waste in that space. So we have different types of biological processes that allow you to break down some of the extra plant material that we're not going to eat and produce more food from that, or even do things like water cleaning or filtration, those kinds of things, all in this one natural system.
Okay, that's really cool. Just gonna throw that out there. I know it's not your flagship, but I did just want to give you an opportunity to kind of tell folks about that, because I was reading that. I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. I want to hear a little bit more. So thank you, I guess, for tackling the big problems. I mean, growing fresh food and making sure that orbit is safe to use in an age of increasing debris are both critical areas. So what does the future look like? So where is Paterson going to be in 1 year, 3 year, 5 years? What's the growth path look like?
Yeah. So right now we're definitely doing a lot more work to engage government interest, but we have commercial customers, and we're advancing our technology regardless of who's interested and where the funding comes from. So the idea is that within the next 3 to 5 years, we're really going to be starting to sell our product and put it into use, to beta testing, all of these things, and increasing our research partnerships and engagement. So shout out to a recent partnership that we just made a couple of weeks ago, but the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany is now, we now have an MOU with them to advance our research. We also work a lot closely with Cornell University through NYCST. So we're just kind of using what we have and our resources and our network to advance the technology to a point where we can put it online and bring it to the folks that actually need it.
Congrats on the new partnership, on the MOU. And you mentioned Cornell. Do you have any other partners in New York? I guess what has been your experience with the ecosystem here in New York, both at Griffiths and kind of throughout the state?
Yeah, I will say that Central New York is definitely a very warm and fuzzy, friendly environment for bringing up a business, and it's been complete like night and day from where I originally started this company, in terms of being able to do the growth that we have been able to do in such a short amount of time, getting access to the right networks and the right partnerships, etc. So we actually currently have a fellow at our company from SUNY Poly, for example, and we continue to expand and reach into this network to try to find ways to partner and help the community, because obviously there's a need for more businesses and more tech development here in the state, but also within Central New York, but also because we're a small business and we need to grow too.
That makes sense, and I'm glad that you have found that New York has been a fertile place for you to kind of set up shop and expand your operations. In terms of kind of the broader space industry, when you interact with companies who may be in non-space sustainability fields, how has the awareness of these challenges kind of evolved over time? And do you think that industry is adapting in a way that will actually help mitigate the space debris problem and maybe adopt some more of these sustainable options in the future?
I think that's an interesting question for a lot of perspectives. So a lot of what's going on in space debris and space domain awareness is political, unfortunately. So we tend to find a lot of stalemates and a lot of questions and concerns about, what if we started to remove things and we remove somebody else's thing? Who's responsible, who pays for it, etc. And we also have this problem where this is a growing industry, and the interests of the major players like our NASA's, European Space Union, DoD, etc. They evolve annually. So where one day we're talking about low Earth orbit, the next year we're talking about cislunar, and we're talking about Mars, and we're talking about all these other things, but we haven't actually fixed the thing that we started off with yet. Or at least we set into play the solution, but we didn't make sure that it got there before we jumped to the next question. So one of the biggest things that's happening right now is there's a lot more talk about lunar orbit and Mars. And so, we're already looking at space sustainability in those regimes. But have we fixed the problem in low Earth orbit? I don't know the answer to that, or at least I'm pretending not to.
Yeah, I was going to say I appreciate the coyness there, and it mentioning the challenges with removal. It actually touches base to a couple of different panels that we had during our in-person forum day yesterday. Both the law and the insurance panels touched on some of the complexities of removal, because under existing international law, removing something, the legal obligation on the remover is to return it to the state of origin, which could be really complicated. And it when you get into it, it makes sense as to why, like, logically you think like, oh yeah, just bring it back down or remove it. It's
Hey Patrick.
Yeah,
Steve here. So
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and as I did chime in on that panel, I was just on a Nottingham University event just prior to this with Michelle Hanlon, Andrea Harrington, et cetera, discussing space debris. Again, if it is not registered to your home state, you're not allowed to touch it. So that the gentleman mentioned the obligation to return, that is not an actual thing. If you find space debris in your territory, yes, you are required to return. But in space, you're not actually allowed to touch a different state's registered space object. And Kaylon, Patrick, sorry to interject. I just want to make sure that that's clear for everybody. Thank you.
No, that's helpful. Thank you again, Steve, for joining us today and for joining us yesterday. And that just kind of speaks to the complexities with dealing with space debris and how sometimes the obvious, solution, just remove it, is not necessarily the easiest, which is why we're very glad that we have innovators like Kaylon and Paterson Aerospace who are figuring out how we navigate this environment. So I know we're about to turn it over. We've been going for about half an hour to some questions. Wanted to give you a chance. Where can folks find you? What do you have coming up? Any events, social media? What should people be looking forward to from you?
Absolutely. Events kind of just happen as they go. We just, sometimes run into the right people and, find out that we can partner with them and work with them. So the best way to keep up with us is on our LinkedIn. You can also visit our website. You can reach us at contact@Paterson Aerospace Systems. Paterson Aerospace, contact@patersonaerospace.com. And yeah, just, feel free to reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Definitely follow the company. But yeah, I'm open to questions. And I did have one last comment for Steve, but I appreciate you interjecting, Steve. I think what you brought up a really good point as well about this idea of like territories in space. And that's another question that, kind of makes this a gray area, right? Because there was this, a few years ago, an astronaut going through like a lawsuit about, midst of some, what's a a good way to say this, but in the midst of some family turmoil and checking into their bank account from orbit, and
That's right. Yep.
they were in the wrong, maybe they were in like over a different country, so therefore the US laws didn't apply to that situation or something along these lines. And so you have this gray area of like, what is your territory over space? Is it just because it's floating over the US, or is it because it's a US asset? And that's another gray area that makes this complicated. So I appreciate you saying that, because that's a really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well. And I think specifically with the respect to the scenario you just mentioned, that may have something as well to do with the downlinks, right? The uplink and downlink, and where that, due to the position over the Earth, where that downlink is going. And then if he was accessing, I think it was not his account or something, yeah, there was some,
it was like
some weirdness there. I forget all the details, but yeah, excellent point on the very subtle nuances here. Thank you for that.
No, thank you for bringing it up. This is what makes this such a fun space to be in. Pun intended.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, we love the intended puns around here. We're open to conversation and questions now. If folks have additional points they wanted to raise, Steve, I don't know if you had any more that you wanted to chime in with.
Just real quickly on the space debris, the way to get around that, right, handling someone else's, a different state's registered space object, is via contract. So if Paterson were doing space debris removal and they're based in the US and they wanted to remove some German space debris, there would have to be some sort of contract to permit that. So anyhow, just a quick point there. There are workarounds to that principle, but especially when it comes to, let's say, our friends who do not register their space assets, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, IC community, you do not want to try and remove anything of theirs that might be space debris, because that'll just be a bad time.
Absolutely.
I suppose your mention of fellowships had kind of spurred a question in my brain, but in terms of the academic pipeline or finding people who are, trained or focused or literate in space sustainability, I guess, are there specific avenues or programs or institutions that kind of offer a detailed path for someone who's interested in getting into this field?
I do think that some universities are at minimum offering more content related to space sustainability. I only know of one university in Germany that actually has a degree focused on space sustainability as a concern, especially from the space domain awareness standpoint. And also Teaching Science and Technology Institute, or Inc. Sorry, they are kind of like a space education platform that actually, teaches our program at Stevens, but they have specific not degree, but certifications around space domain awareness as well, where they really deep dive into the nuances, into the different technologies being used and how those things can be used. And that program is really well developed. They also wrote the textbook on space domain awareness, which was in collaboration with Mariba Jha, who is for all intents and purposes, the expert of space domain awareness, in the world right now. So, in terms of education, those are some of the main ones. And even Dr. Jha, he is at UT Austin, and he has an entire institute focused on, space and AI crossover, which also leans heavily into space domain awareness. So those are just a few education programs that are kind of within this realm.
Interesting. And we've had a lot of interaction with folks from Stevens so far this week. It's been great to meet them, and there's probably some greater New York, New Jersey, cross Hudson partnerships going on there in the future. Are there any events, like is there a space sustainability like conference, or is it just kind of part of larger conversations about space domain awareness, or are there specific forums for these conversations?
The biggest two that I'm aware of are Ascend and Amos. And Amos is more so like space telescopes, like space laser type stuff, but it does touch heavily on space domain awareness. And yeah, Ascend is more recently developed, but more focused on space sustainability as an entire concept. So I'm pretty sure they touch on different aspects of it, not just the space domain awareness. Those are the main two that I'm aware of.
Interesting. Maybe we'll have to do something here in New York in the future. In terms of that, we're always up for new event ideas. We got a thumbs up on that. So there's some early appreciation for that. Go ahead, Kaylon.
No, I was just gonna give a thumbs up too because I agree with
that. Okay, cool. We'll put that in the hopper moving forward. Once we wrap up Space Week, you had touched on NYCST real quick. I guess if you just wanted to go through the audience, I'm not sure everyone here would be familiar. I know we're intimately familiar with what NYCST is, but I guess from your perspective as a company who's partnered with them and utilized some of their resources, I guess just tell us all a little bit about that.
Absolutely, and then we can get to Rishika's question. So yeah, NYCST, the New York Consortium for Space Technology, is a consortium of a variety of companies and organizations, kind of all centered within the Cornell University ecosystem. And it's essentially a nonprofit that provides funding as well as guidance and networking for companies trying to do things within the space industry, from workforce development, research and development, and I forget what the third one is. But yeah, essentially really just trying to engage New York and the greater, US on ways that the state of New York can really be a pivotal part of this aerospace or space industry. They have resources outside of funding for research projects that include, test beds and testing facilities for space technology, being able to connect you with experts and interns and all these other things. It's been one of the one of the more important relationships that we've had out here, and they've all been very important relationships. So that's saying something.
No, thank you very much for that. And then I know that Rashika had a question, and then Chandler put one in the chat. So go ahead, Rashika.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. And thank you, Kaylon. This is really a nice conversation that we are having. I'm glad I was able to make it. Just one point, like we do have in the Europe, I have seen that conference happening completely focused on the space debris. So I believe it was in the month of April. It just passed recently in Bonn, Germany. But yeah, these are the events, like apart from Ascent and then MS conference, there are so many space debris dedicated conference happening around in the Europe. I have witnessed that. And my actual question is, like, I was having a conversation with Professor Jha last week, and then like we kind of, when we talk about sustainability, the one buzzword that comes into our mind is like the debris, right? And what are the active technologies that we can use to mitigate the debris? And then where are we now? What are the innovative solutions or technologies we can come up with? But taking a step back, if we look at the perspective from repurposing the existing satellite assets or extending its mission life cycle and give a new life to the old satellites, that also a way of acting towards the sustainability, which we call as a circular space economy, right? I want to understand, and I want to hear from you, Kaylon and Patrick, and whoever is open to have this conversation. What's your view on the circular space economy, and where are we at as a national space agencies at this moment, and how are we acting towards it? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Kaylon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I love that question because it, kind of ties into basic environmental concern like principles, which are like, reduce, reuse, recycle. And this would be under reuse, right? Like, so basically being able to reuse some of these things that are up there in orbit. And for the most part, a lot of spacecraft have historically been built with the idea that it will have more than one mission, or that in the event that that mission is still useful after end of life, it will stay on for a little bit longer and it will keep doing whatever it does. And that has also been part of the problem, unfortunately, because we literally run these things down until they have no fuel for deorbiting or, making maneuvers when necessary. The downside to that is that we did not really account for things like technologies changing on Earth and, how that would affect being able to reuse these things in space. So for example, we might have a spacecraft up there from the 50s and we don't really code and insert programming language from the 50s here anymore. So therefore, we are no longer able to make the necessary changes, or those changes are so out of scope of that language or that spacecraft that it actually is just pointless to track. So that is one of the problems. Now we have seen that there has been interest now in making spacecraft more modular and more, I guess, the lack of a better phrasing, making their missions more adjustable and changeable, maybe even making like the sensors on the spacecraft more open so that they can, potentially be refocused for other purposes. And this is an idea, but this also goes back to that whole notion of, what happens when we've burned this thing out past its end of life. And this is why we have now technologies that are being developed for things like in situ resource utilization, and also doing, refueling and all these other things, because those capabilities will help these older spacecraft be able to, adjust or be updated so that they can continue their use. How effective that's going to be, we don't know. We don't know how long that's going to take. And I think biggest problem of all is that with anything related to space, when we throw in the commercial idea, everybody wants to have a million of their own satellites up in orbit, right? That's what we're seeing right now. Everybody wants their big constellation so they can be more competitive. So yeah, we can throw up 1,000 reusable, reconfigurable spacecraft. But if every company decides they're going to do that too, then what's the point? Is it really sustainable? Is it really solving the problem? So I don't know, Rashika, I think you might have heard some of these similar conversations from me in our coursework, but
yeah.
This idea of how, what are we thinking about when we think about environmental sustainability and for spacecraft? Because what's sustainable on Earth may not be sustainable on Mars, or what's sustainable in Leo may not be sustainable in Mars low Earth orbit, right? So we are thinking about things only from the perspective that we have here, and we're not really considering what will happen over there. Not necessarily related to your question, but a very good example that I've been paying attention to is, okay, we want to send people to live on Mars. Well, how is that going to affect the Mars ecosystem, and is that really sustainable if we're changing that ecosystem to suit us? Is that sustainable? Okay, we don't know too much about, what life might be there, but we do know that there's like rock formations and physical structures and things and environments, weather phenomena that exist there. And how does us landing a spacecraft or developing a large city or doing any of these things affect that natural environment? And is that sustainable? Is that safe? Is that good for that planet? So these are the things we have to think about too.
Thank you, Rashika, for the question. Thank you, Kaylon, for the answer. Personally, I also, I studied environmental sustainability in college. It's an issue that's very dear to my heart personally, in addition to my passion for space. So I think, the role of Empire Space in this situation would be to, if we identify multiple partners working in space sustainability in the state, finding ways to network them together, hold events, identify capacities and things that help them expand their work, do their work easier so that they're able to better achieve their missions. Because space sustainability is incredibly important. If low Earth orbit gets clogged with junk and we can't use it anymore, that's effectively that. The vast, sections of modern society would cease to function as they currently do, and exploring or understanding further out into the solar system would all of a sudden become a far more difficult proposition. So we're really, like environmental sustainability is here on Earth, it really is kind of a core foundational baseline issue, because if that, substrata that the entire space economy is based on becomes clogged or non-functional, everything that is standing on top of it would also collapse. So everything else that we talk about and prioritize at Empire Space would become moot if the space sustainability situation spirals in a way where some of those significant impacts do materialize. And I know we also had a chat question from Chandler Toffa. What international guidelines from UNOSA or the IADC or national regulations exist for space sustainability? Is there a standard or is there no standard?
I think we're struggling to redefine an international standard, but I think every nation and honestly every commercial company has their own standard for this right now. So NASA has their space sustainability report. I think it's called SST or something like that. I can't remember what it's called. The ESA has their own version. Maybe a few countries in Europe actually have their own versions. Like I think Luxembourg has their own space sustainability report. So does Sweden, and quite a few, have individual things. But everybody's kind of like, and to Rashika's point earlier about having this event in which it's a UN event, even though it was in Bonn, Germany. This idea of like trying to now bring this back to the UN to say, well, hey, this thing you wrote in the 50s about space collaboration and all of this stuff, maybe we need to update some of that stuff to make it legally enforceable, to make it more succinct across the globe, so that we all understand what it means to be sustainable and to do things the right way in this industry, and so on and so forth. So yeah, there's a bunch of people talking about and having their own ideas about this topic, but the real issue here is that we need to get everyone to have this conversation together. So actually I went to the UN what was it, the World Space Forum in Bonn last December, and that was a lot of the conversation was just about like these legalities and policies around the future of the space industry. So yeah.
Really interesting. Thank you very much for digging into that. And I would imagine, the UN would probably be the forum, and that comes with pros and cons because you have every nation, but might not necessarily be known as the fastest moving. Sometimes the strength of the legal regime. So it definitely is in a really interesting space. And then Quadri asked, is there any globally centralized body or entity, or even nationally in the U.S., putting together best practices for space sustainability for future design considerations? So is there any kind of industry body that has principles at play?
Same list. If you want locally, the NASA Space Sustainability Report. I think it was. I still don't remember the name. I should just Google it. Space Sustainability Strategy. Yeah, and I think the DoD might also have one too. So yeah, they or at least the Space Force. But yeah, so there is some stuff going on locally in the U.S. and on the global scale. But everybody else will tell you to go to the UN Outer Space Treaty thing, which only says, hey, you're responsible for whatever you put up there, and you're responsible for taking it back down. That's the only 2 lines about space sustainability in the whole thing. So yeah. You're not breaking any rules right now, and I hope that doesn't encourage you.
Great principles, but without any operational practices, with no time frames or mechanisms or anything else in there, it's kind of,
yeah, exactly.
We wind up where we are.
Right.
And then Josie had. Go ahead.
I was just going to throw one last thing in there. There has been, in terms of progress, it's not all negative, but there has been some progress in reducing the end of life status of space objects. That happened about 2 or 3 years ago, where now there is a actual cap of 5 years that's enforceable. And there actually also within the last 2 or 3 years was the first time I want to say the FAA, don't quote me on this, but they actually fined someone, it might have been the FCC. They fined someone for violating space sustainability rules by, doing something along those lines. Yeah.
So that was another topic that came up at our space law panel yesterday, because one of the panelists had some work with companies who were affected by that. So that was a really interesting conversation. He implied at the time that they were adapting to it. It wasn't critical, and it was again the smorgasbord of regulatory agencies that it could have been the FCC, it could have been NOAA, it could have been FAA, at any given point. But Josie had asked real quick as we head down towards the end here, any thoughts on the deorbiting of the International Space Station in terms of space sustainability?
Great conversation. I will leave this hint that it's probably just going to end up staying there. I won't answer any questions about it.
Interesting. All right. I know this is going to become a probably larger and larger topic as it gets closer and closer to that date. So
Patrick?
Yeah. Go ahead, Steve.
Real quick, for folks who are not necessarily aware yet, for stuff prior to the ISS, when that's deorbited, it typically goes into a point in the South Pacific called Point Nemo, and there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. So just for folks' awareness, there's a particular graveyard in the ocean where that kind of stuff tends to go. But I won't speak to the ISS either. I know there's a lot of folks on both sides of that. So cheers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Charged is the word that I would use for that conversation these days. And then Point Nemo, the seafloor over there has to be absolutely ridiculous with all the spacecraft that have plunged in there over the years. Any final questions or comments from the audience?
I think you mentioned one more question.
What was it? Did I?
I think Quadri had one. Covering any larger risks to missions and environments under sustainment. engine emissions, solar radiation. Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, no, we aren't looking at those in a major way. One report that was part of my thesis back in like 2020 was from the LA Times, which unfortunately was the only citable like person talking about this at the time. But the idea that you know, the what was it, the exhaust from a SpaceX rocket launch was equivalent to like 40 years of running your car in traffic, which, you know, for one launch. And this idea that we're going to be launching annually like 60 plus of these things, right? So yeah, that was a point of concern. There's been minimal research or conversation around that since, but it's a point. It's something I'm very interested in. As I mentioned, when I was in Germany, there were some companies starting to look at like eco fuels for rocket launches, and even, you know, I will commend SpaceX and even Blue Origin for looking into these things too. I think one of them, I can't remember which. Well, no, SpaceX did like methane, which is, you know, burns a lot cleaner, and then I think Blue Origin might have been looking at some kind of like biopropane type thing at some point, which also would have burned pretty clean as a rocket fuel. I don't know where they are with those things or implementing. Pretty sure SpaceX did implement. But yeah, it's kind of outside of my scope right now.
All right. Really cool. All right. Quadri's got one more question.
Viability of these approaches. I will not comment on the viability of what other companies are doing, but I do think that there is, you know, there is some value in trying, and there's a lot of value in, you know, potentially finding a solution. I will say that there has been, so for example, if you look at Astroscale, Astroscale, they have a requirement that anything they remove has to have this thing attached to it that makes it more grabbable. That's not really feasible, right? Because there's a ton of things already out there that needs to be removed. So how are you going to retrofit all of these old spacecraft with this thing to then remove it? You might as well just go remove it. And yeah, there's a lot of good ideas out there, but until one of them works and doesn't create more problems, then there's really not much to be said on it. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you very much for all of that insight. We are wrapping up with our hour. This was an absolutely fantastic conversation. We want to thank everyone from the audience for joining us and engaging with the content and offering up some great comments and questions. Thank you again to Kaylon Paterson from Paterson Aerospace for joining us, for taking the time to share with us their work, their vision, and all the awesome stuff that you're doing in New York. And just thank you again for the work. This is an incredibly important area. We're very glad that there are New York-based companies who are tackling some of these serious challenges. And then I'll leave the final word with you.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who joined, and, you know, for, you know, the great questions and the good engagement. Like this, you know, obviously is important to me, but it's good to know that it's important to other folks as well. And if you guys have any other questions or concerns or comments, like, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Please follow the company as well. A lot of people just follow the company too. And also, yeah, our email is on there. It's again, contact at Paterson Aerospace. It's on our website. So if you want to reach out and, you know, have a conversation or, you know, talk about research, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity, Patrick.
Of course. It's a pleasure to have you, as always. Everyone have a great day. Thank you for joining.